History remembers the airplane that broke the sound barrier. It almost forgot the one that figured out how. Because before the Bell X-1 became famous, another aircraft had already solved one of the biggest problems in supersonic flight. It never flew. Most stories have another side. This one's just a little stranger. I'm Bill, and this is Buffalo Air Park. Let's dive in. On October 14th, 1947, the world changed. Captain Chuck Yeager climbed into the bright orange Bell X-1, was carried into the sky beneath a B-29, lit 4 rocket engines, and became the first person officially to fly faster than the speed of sound. It's one of aviation's greatest success stories. But there's another chapter that's rarely told. Because 2 years before Yeager made history, a small British company had already designed an airplane specifically built to do the same thing. Not only that, they had solved one of the biggest engineering mysteries standing between pilots and supersonic flight. Its name was the Miles M52, and it never left the ground. Ironically, the story begins because of a simple mistake. In 1943, British intelligence intercepted reports that Germany was developing an aircraft capable of 1,000 kilometers per hour. Somewhere along the chain of communication, kilometers became miles. Suddenly, officials believed the Germans were building a fighter capable of 1,000 miles per hour, well beyond the speed of sound. Whether it was true hardly mattered anymore. The panic was real. The British Air Ministry responded with an astonishing requirement known as Specification E24/43. It called for an aircraft capable of level flight at 1,000 miles per hour and climbing to 36,000 feet in just 90 seconds. Even today, historians describe it as one of the most ambitious aircraft specifications ever issued. The contract went to Miles Aircraft. At first glance, that choice seems odd. Miles wasn't a giant manufacturer. They were best known for trainers in light aircraft, but they also had a reputation for solving difficult problems in unconventional ways. To power the aircraft, they partnered with Frank Whittle, whose advanced turbojet included an experimental reheat system, the early version of what we now call an afterburner. Then, the engineers ran into a problem no one had ever solved. Nobody knew actually what happened as an airplane approached Mach 1. Wind tunnels became unreliable. Shock waves reflected off the tunnel walls and distorted the results. So, the designers looked elsewhere for the answers. Bullets. A .50 caliber projectile remained remarkably stable after passing through the sound barrier. If nature had already solved the problem, why not copy it? The M52 became, quite literally, a manned bullet. It featured a pointed conical nose, an almost perfectly cylindrical fuselage, and wings so razor thin, they earned the nickname Gillette wings. The pilot even sat inside a pressurized escape capsule that could separate from the aircraft using explosive bolts if everything went terribly wrong, which, considering nobody had ever attempted this before, seemed like a pretty reasonable precaution. The test pilot selected for the job was Captain Eric Brown, better known as Winkle Brown. When asked years later why he had been chosen, Brown smiled and said it was because he was the smallest man in the room. It was classic Winkle Brown humor. But behind the joke was an incredibly serious challenge. As aircraft approached the speed of sound, pilots discovered something terrifying. The elevators stopped working. Shock waves formed around the control surfaces, locking them in place. Pilots could find themselves trapped in steep dives with almost no ability to recover. The Miles engineers realized the answer wasn't moving a small elevator. It was moving the entire horizontal tail. Instead of hinging only the back section, the whole stabilizer pivoted together. Today, we simply call it an all-moving tail, or stabilizer. At the time, it was revolutionary. Brown tested the concept on a modified Supermarine Spitfire during high-speed dives and proved it solved the control problem. It would become one of the defining features of nearly every supersonic fighter that followed. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Bell Aircraft was developing the X-1. Like the M52, it borrowed the shape of a .50 caliber bullet. Unlike the British aircraft, it relied on rocket engines and had to be carried aloft beneath a bomber before release. In 1944, Britain and the United States agreed to exchange high-speed secrets. Miles supplied aerodynamic studies, engineering data, and information on its all-moving tail. The British expected comparable information in return. That exchange never really happened. Later, Bell encountered the very same control problems the British had already solved. The X-1 eventually adopted an adjustable horizontal stabilizer that allowed Yeager to maintain control as he accelerated through Mach 1. Whether that solution was directly inspired by the British research or arrived at independently remains debated. What isn't debated is that the M52 team had recognized and solved the problem first, and then everything unraveled. By early 1946, the first prototype was nearly finished. Depending on the source, it was somewhere between 80 and 90% complete. Flight testing was only months away. Then, the British government abruptly canceled the program. Officials cited cost, changing priorities, and the unknown dangers of supersonic flight. The aviation community was stunned. Critics later nicknamed the decision Ben's blunder. To make matters worse, completed airframes, drawings, and much of the project's hardware were ordered destroyed. Years later, conspiracy theories emerged, suggesting political agreements had quietly ended Britain's chance to beat America into the history books. No definitive evidence has ever proven those claims, but the questions have never completely disappeared. The engineers did manage one final test. Instead of risking a pilot, they built a 3/10 scale rocket-powered model. Released from a de Havilland Mosquito in 1948, the model accelerated to approximately Mach 1.38. It flew beautifully. In fact, it flew so well that it ignored commands to dive into the ocean and simply disappeared over the Atlantic. A tiny unmanned aircraft quietly demonstrated that the design probably would have worked all along. Nearly a decade later, even the British government admitted canceling the M2 had significantly delayed British aeronautical research. History remembers the Bell X-1 because it crossed the finish line first, but sometimes history isn't only about who wins the race. Sometimes it's about the people who built the road everyone else traveled. The Miles M52 never broke the sound barrier, but it helped show the world how it could be done. And that wraps up another tale from aviation's stranger side. Until next time, keep your eyes on the skies.